All right. Well, welcome everybody. So this month's book of the month, Outliers, The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell. That's what we read over, what was that, November and December. So yeah, so I'm going to start this off with just a quote from the book. So success is not a random act. It arises out of predictable and powerful set of circumstances and opportunities. I think that sums up the book fairly well. Just reading from the book reports, there were mixed feelings about this book. But in general, it feels like most people enjoyed the stories. And that was different. It was a different book than what we normally read, where it's not so much like a self-help book that gives you instructions and a real like call to action of what to do next. It's really just like insight and stories. And I thought that was just interesting. And I'm glad most of you enjoyed the stories that are in here. Okay, so what is an outliers? Does anybody want to take a stab at what they feel like what an outlier is based on the topics in the book? Anybody volunteer? Because if you don't, then I'm going to call on you.
I can go.
All right, so now.
An outlier in a layman's language, different from the norm in a good way. So like literally, as the word says, outlier, right? So if there's a group of people, a person who is standing out of the group in a positive way, in an outstanding way, that's an outlier.
Awesome. Anybody else have any thoughts? Okay, I'll give you oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add someone who's given opportunities, but make the most of them.
Yeah, that was a really good point. So here's what I got out is an outlier is a truly exceptional individual in his or her field of expertise who doesn't fit into the normal expectations of who they should be. They're so superior that they demand more complete explanation. So there's also another subject in the book of the misconception of success. So what makes outliers so successful? So the common explanation is that they must have a distinct talent or gift that sets them apart from the rest of us. But Gladwell teaches us that this is wrong, or at least it only tells part of the story. It leaves out other elements of success and dangerously distorts reality. And then when you personalize success, you overlook important social and cultural factors that make outliers who they are. I thought that was interesting. So some of the things that I got as a takeaway for like the secrets of success, when you distill some of the things that came out of the book, is that success is less about talent than it is about opportunity, something like that Jackie mentioned. To master a subject, you need to put in about 10,000 hours of practice. Outliers have been given opportunities and have the strength and presence of mind to seize them. Genius alone is not enough. You must pair it with practical intelligence. Family background shapes practical intelligence and strongly influences your success. And your social, cultural, and ethnic backgrounds affect how you respond to conflict and crisis and how you communicate. Any thoughts on this? And disagree, agree? Any thoughts?
I thought it was pretty interesting when they did the whole just kind of going back to the family thing. Like there are like cultures that are better at certain things because the way they raise you, they incorporate certain things as you're aging. So it's making you more prone that like, oh, this part of your life is if they teach you a certain way and they add certain things, like you're gonna be better at certain things because you were raised in a certain way compared to other people. When like we're raised differently, that means like we're not being taught the same things, or we're not learning the same things, so that you're gonna be better than me at certain things as we age, just because you were raised differently. So it's kind of I thought it was interesting, like depending on where you were born, like you could actually matters of like it could actually influence what you're good at based on how you were raised. So I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I did too. And like all of us, we all have like rich backgrounds, complex backgrounds, and that's kind of defines who we are. And we can take from those and like it shapes like who we are. And I think it was Khalil. I think you mentioned that like these kinds of ideas could be demotivating, but I think that's more of like how you interpret the information. Akil, I don't know if you want to.
I guess I'm a cup half full kind of guy. But yeah, it was just like, if I didn't have X, Y, and Z, it's like I can't be like I think in my report I said I can't be a NASA engineer if I don't have like all these different like backgrounds. Like my parents were not like engineers or something like that. And I just saw it in that sense as well. Like it could be demotivating for some people, I guess, if you look at it in that light. But just going back to this, I really like the idea of the 10,000 hours. I think that's what he's like most famously known for, because I see that a lot in like the personal development world. So it was cool to see like the musician stories, right? Like we think talent is something that comes innate to people, especially like musicians or creative endeavors. But it was cool to see that like the best violinists actually put in the work. Like they put in substantially more time than everybody else, and that's why they're so good. You might start off on like a different baseline, like maybe being naturally better at something, but like with hard work you can like kind of equalize that. So I guess that was the other side of the spectrum, right, where it's like a little bit more motivating that if you work hard you can, you know, reach your goals. So yeah, I love that idea.
I think actually like the idea is that background, all the things that you're talking about, is not necessarily, I didn't take it as it allows you to reach your goals, having all of those key ingredients in place. It actually leads you to becoming an outlier. It leads you to becoming an absolutely exceptional and phenomenal performer in whatever field you choose to be in. You know, that's kind of how I saw it. I think that you could still be a good violinist and be satisfied with what you're doing, maybe just putting in like, I don't know, 7,500 hours, and right, but it's not going to lead you to becoming like the best of the best.
Yeah. I feel like most people, they don't aim for mastery when they're doing like maybe hobbies and things like that, right? So there's no point putting 10,000 hours into something that you don't really want to master, I guess.
I think like so the thing I kind of struggled with is that, you know, like, so in this example, the 10,000 hours, you know, assuming that you subscribe to that and you do that, you will have success. Okay, let's just say that, right? But then obviously there's the other examples of, you know, like the hockey season, where if you're born in January and February, right, that you, despite putting in the 10,000 hours, you're going to have success if you're born earlier in the year than later in the year. So I think where I kind of struggle with the book is some of the things you're like in control of, right? Like the Korea airplane stuff, right? Like there's some things that you are in control of, and there's other things that you're not in control of. And for me, it's like an outlier for me in the book is someone, I forget the example exactly, but it's like, you know, they had a low IQ, but they didn't put the work in, but they were still successful. You know what I'm talking about? It's like midway in the book, right? So for me, it's like an outlier is like not the 10,000 hour person. That's the norm of success. I would see, like, I mean, if I take myself as an example, right? Like, you know, I'm a minority. I grew up like lower average income. I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room most of the time. You know, my mom worked at Tim Hortons. My dad's a TV technician, like, you know, but for me, it's the 10,000 hours for sure. Because in that first year, I was like, holy shit, like this is hard, right? Year 2 gets easier, year 3 gets, and now I feel like I'm getting it. Obviously we're still hitting walls, and you know, the next level of 10,000 hours is there. But, and I'm sure you guys can all relate to that too, like Roy, in your world and doing websites, or if you're a performance marketer, or, you know, sales obviously is another good one for like Michael and myself. You know, we probably put our 10,000 hours in for sales, so we're feeling comfortable there. So for me, like putting the 10,000 hours, I know it's in the book, and again, maybe I'm misunderstanding what Malcolm Gladwell trying to say about it, but the 10,000 hours is not an outlier. Someone that does like 2,000 hours and is able to like build like $100 million business, that's an outlier, right? Because you're like going against the grain, right? So anyways, I know there's like a lot of random sporadic thoughts, but I think like going to Cullo, back to what you're saying about like the glass half empty, it's like, you can't possibly do 10,000 hours if you think for a moment it's not going to work. Like you have to stay, you know, when you're building your, you know, you and Matthias and Ileana, when you guys are doing your podcast and YouTube channels, you have to be like, I'm going to grow it. It's going to grow. You have to believe that. Like with our business, you have to believe it's going to grow. You have to believe your campaign is going to get thousands of leads. Otherwise you won't even put the hours in to do it. Right.
Yeah. The way I kind of see it is like, obviously 10,000 looks good on paper. Like it's very like an attractive number to put out there, but it seems very like I feel like it almost like filters people out in the sense that like it seems impossible. So the way I kind of see it is like this mentality of like infinite hours. Like you shouldn't be focusing on hours. You should just be along for the ride as long as it's going to take to get it done, to get to where you want to be, and make sure that you're learning and readjusting and finding new ways to do your thing. But putting 10,000 hours on is like, I don't like that. I rather the infinite amount of hours, the sense of like, you're just doing it because you're doing it and you love it, and you're going to just do it until it works forever. So that's kind of how I see it.
I think there's this idea of deliberate practice too, right? Like 10,000 hours, it depends on the quality of the hours, right? You have 5,000 like really strong hours where you're like actively working on your weaknesses, or like really in depth or in flow, in a state of flow, versus like 10,000 hours of just like, you know, maybe not being so focused on it, then the quality is different too, right? So I kind of agree with that.
I want to go back to what Riaz said about like let's say like the 2,000 hour person that made like $100 million. Now, if you take that person, that's an outlier. I think what Malcolm Gladwell is arguing is that that person, even though they spent little time doing it, that there are behind the scenes, there are advantages and lucky circumstances that allowed them to get to that place that people don't normally talk about, because people like talking about, you know, you have like the self-made man or self-made woman that made them that superstar, but they don't talk about like the really lucky thing that happened to them. So we put these outliers on pedestals, and we feel like we're not able to achieve that, but ignoring that they have in extreme amounts of opportunities that led them there. And the book kind of just reminds us to kind of like, well, that could be a dangerous way to think about it, because then it could be demotivating for us that we'll never achieve that. But maybe we won't achieve being like a superstar, but at least we'll be like the best that we can be, because we've put in the work, we've done 10,000 hours of practice. We've seized opportunities that come our way, because not all of us will get the really lucky opportunities that some of these outliers have gotten. That's sort of like my take.
Yeah, and I'll just go back to Matthias's point. I look at 10,000 hours a little differently. Like that was kind of one of the highlights for me in the book, and it was motivating in the sense that when I look at that number, I'm like, okay, if I'm not good at something, that kind of indirectly motivates me. Well, that book kind of shows that you need to put 10,000 hours to be successful. Okay, I have a long way to go, so let me keep working harder, you know? So I'm just taking that number in that way. So there are two ways you can take that number. I get it, but I kind of took it that way.
I like that a lot, Sonali, and I think it also kind of completely takes the instant gratification just out of the picture. Like it obliterates it. Like you want instant gratification? No chance, because you need to put 10,000 hours. And someone that's not all in, it's not going to put 10,000 hours. They're going to give up and try something else. So I do like that aspect of it. And also just one final point, bouncing off of you, Roy, when you're talking about like, the way I kind of see it is like, sure, there's these lucky moments, but because you're putting 10,000 hours or however many, you're raising your chances at hitting that jackpot, right? So it's like, sure, some people, like in the sense of like, let's just use the internet success as an example. It's all algorithmic based, right? So one day, one of your blog posts or something will blow up, right? And people will be like, oh, you're an overnight success. Well, no, I put 10,000 hours, and because of that, I raise my chances to be picked up by an algorithm. Someone that's put a day into a video rather than someone that's put a year and a half, it totally sets them apart. So I do see how that kind of ties into the 10,000 hour.
That's like what I was saying last week about like, you know, we won the awards not for the work we did last year, for the work we did the years before, right? Exactly. So the awards are just a recognition of that, right? So cool.
Well, I'm glad we have a lot to say about the 10,000 hours, because that's going to be a discussion point. So yeah, let's. So I think we can do like a breakout session, I believe, right? I don't think I have control. Maybe that's Ileana. But okay, so here are three discussion points that we can talk about in our groups. And then once we've talked about them, we can come back and discuss them with the rest of the team. So yes, take some screenshots so that you have this. So first one, do you believe the 10,000 hour rule is true? And what have you spent 10,000 hours on? Number two, so the book talks about practical intelligence. How do you define practical intelligence, and how does it differ from intellectual genius? And then Gladwell argues that autonomy, complexity, and connection between effort and reward are the three qualities that work has to have to be satisfying. This wasn't like a huge part of the book, but but this quote always it really struck me, and I feel like it was a really important thing to learn and understand. So I wanted to know if everybody agrees or disagrees. Are there other qualities that he missed? And does this statement change the way you think about work? So with that, are we able to?
I made you
do
the
ratings?
co-host, Bryce.
Oh, okay,
so
cool.
I think you should be able to.
Okay. Let's see. Breakout rooms. Okay, cool.
I did it.
Yeah. So how many are we here? 15. So I think let's do 3 breakout rooms. Okay, let's try that. Come back, everybody. Hope everybody had enough time to discuss all the points. And let's see. So, shall we start with, let's say group 1. So that was, who was that? So that was Fernando, Ileana, Khalil, Riaz, and Basfi.
Sure, I could talk. Overall, for the first one, we had some like different points, but we kind of all agreed that with the 10,000 hour rule, depending on how into the subject you're in, your 10,000 could actually be 2,000 hours, 3,000 hours, 4,000 hours. It really depends on like how into it you are, and like the more into it you are, like your 10,000 could come a lot sooner, just because you're actually willing to put more effort into it because you really enjoy it, compared to like something else. Vasfi, you were mentioning something about someone who was working in what was it again? You mentioned that someone was working like a regular job.
Like booking ads, but in a newspaper.
Yeah, like someone who did that for like 10,000 hours wouldn't necessarily like enjoy like, even though they did it for 10,000 hours, it might not necessarily be like their cup of tea type of thing. So when you invested it, versus like someone who put 10,000 hours into like something that they're actually passionate about, those two type of quality of hours is very different. One person is like just doing 10,000 hours just to do 10,000 hours and not necessarily coming out of anything from it, versus the other person who's doing like 10,000 hours for like Matthias, for example, like doing YouTube, like he's getting more value out of those hours that he's putting in, and like his 10,000 hours could come a lot more sooner for him. That's kind of how we did number 1.
How about the practical intelligence versus genius?
Khalil, you want to talk about this one?
Sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, this one we didn't really go over this one too much, but
Okay.
I think the way it stuck out to me was like street smarts versus book smarts. So like maybe innate ability versus, I think with practical intelligence, we were saying like you have to be immersed in like the world and make mistakes and learn lessons and kind of learn on the job or like through experience. So that's the way that we kind of defined practical intelligence versus intellectual genius or like innate ability.
So for practical intelligence, I just want to say one thing on this, because like I really, when I was reading this part, I really resonated with this. And it's like, I'm not a huge academic guy. I went to school, but you know, it's, for me, it's more about situational awareness and like being adaptable to situations. And you know, Michael and I always kind of joke about, oh, there's like some kind of secret sauce when we hire people. Like there's something special about all of us. And of course, we all think we're special, but we always try to put our finger on like, what is that, so we can bottle it, right? And to me, I think it's actually practical intelligence. Like, you know, Michael and Christina and I were the other day, were talking about the fact that like we've all worked in hotels and travel a lot, and you know, the travel circle, and when we're together at SAS North, it feels like I'm working at the hotel again. We're like part of the travel circle. And I think a part of that is that kind of shared practical intelligence that we're all like adaptable to different situations. And of course the cultural backgrounds and stuff is part of that too. But for me, it's really about the situational awareness and the ability to adapt to different situations. So I really like this part of the book.
Great. And then what about the last one? Autonomy, complexity, and connection between effort and reward.
We said a lot about the complexity aspect of our work. It's really nice when you tackle a really complex problem and you can actually like persevere and go over the hurdle. It really is satisfying just because it kind of gives you, it's kind of like a pat on the back where like you're kind of like proving it to yourself that even when you come to these type of difficult problems, you actually have the knowledge and experience to actually overcome it. And based off like the things that you worked in the past can actually help you with problems moving forward. So like experience can also play a part in like the complexity aspect of like tasking, like what you would want in a task for it to be satisfying for you. So we kind of all agreed with the complexity side of it.
Cool. Any other thoughts before we move to room 2? Okay, so let's hear from Allison, Jackie, Matthias, and Michael.
So for the 10,000 hours question, we all basically agreed that putting in dedicated practice would lead to mastery. Like that makes a lot of sense to all of us. I think also, I just want to know, I think in the book that he actually qualified that he meant 10,000 hours of like dedicated focus, not just like an hour of like whatever, like, oh, I'm technically practicing programming, but not really focusing on it. So I guess that makes it like literally 10,000 hours of actual practice. We also talked about how if you start putting in hours to practice the skill instead of putting it off or finding excuses not to, you could start to kind of like accrue those hours and like, you know, get better at a thing. A big example that came up was Matthias's video editing and his YouTube channel, and how much time he puts into that, as well as Jackie in French, because she studied it from a young age. And then we also reflected on kind of not seeking instant gratification when you're looking to grow a skill, like you're not going to be kind of good at something right away. So putting in the hours and being consistent is a really big part of it. Did anyone want to add anything to that question in my group?
Matthias, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think we touched on the quality of the hours is really important. The sense of completely destroying instant gratification. I think the importance, of course, of consistency as well. Like it should be a journey of growth and kind of learning. Consistency is key in this sense as well. But I think that was about it. I think Allison, you covered it pretty well.
For the next question, about practical intelligence and intellectual genius, we talked about how for us practical intelligence means having an open mind, being adaptable, kind of having experience and like being able to apply that experience into your work, being resourceful, being efficient, and like focusing on outcomes, I think was kind of the key thing. Like instead of it being just a lot of theoretical knowledge, like being able to like be practical with your practical intelligence, I guess. And then I think it was Michael who pointed out that there's this kind of ideal mix of using practical intelligence as well as intellectual genius, which we kind of defined as, I guess, like bookish smart. So like someone who like kind of knows a lot of things, not necessarily in a practical sense, but like, you know, having studied it. So yeah, kind of having both is good.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything for that point?
I just gotta say I love how the first team mentioned, like, made the comparison between like street smart and like book smart. I think that's like it like obviously that can mean a lot of things, but in the workplace, I guess that's just, it comes off as more natural when you're like a practical, and like when you have practical intelligence, you're more of a people person. You kind of have a lot more, the way I see it, of course, like I feel like you have more empathy. You kind of you know how to work around different types of people, different environments, how to address different problems. Like it's just, it makes you a more, I guess, balanced person, but I might be biased because I feel like I'm a practical intelligent. Yeah.
Okay. And the last question about the components that make up satisfying work. We didn't get too much time on this question. I think we had like under a minute, but I think we all agreed that like kind of a balance of those three things was really important. And then Michael also added that having a unified vision across, like if you're working with like a group of people, or Matthias mentioned even like if you're working on your own, like having a solid direction to go towards and like it's clearly defined, makes your work satisfying because you can kind of measure your progress, I guess. And yeah.
Great, thank you. So final group was Christina, Leslie, Sonali, and myself.
So for the most part, we do believe that the 10,000 hour rule is true. Not necessarily like that amount of hours specifically, but that you do have to put the work in to achieve what you want. And then how do you define practical intelligence and how does it differ from intellectual genius? Yeah, we talked about the street smarts versus book smarts, and you do need the problem solving and the practical, but you also need the intelligence, the intellectual intelligence to learn the factual stuff. And so a combo is obviously ideal for success. And then the third question, we do agree for the most part. And then Sonali, I don't know if you wanted to expand with your point on this.
Yeah, no, I think we agree on the most part, but I was just telling the group that how the complexity part is also kind of influenced by what you do on a daily basis. Of course, every day we come in the morning and we solve, for the most part throughout the day, very busy, try to solve complex problems. And I was like, well, sometimes simple tasks can be a luxury. So it was like a joke, like, you know, we don't mind sometimes some simple tasks, you know, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, well, I also mentioned in the group that like, yes, I think every once in a while, we live very complex jobs, every once in a while you want something simple to do, but imagine every day you just had very uncomplex things, just simple stuff. I think your brain would just get bored and crave more complexity. And I think having a job that like we all have here, that is it's a hard job. I mean, we do a lot of hard work to get things done and like solve problems. And I think that's very satisfying. And then if we see the outcome of the reward, when we see the click-through rates go up, when we see like conversions, that's very satisfying. And you know that the more work you put into something will lead to those rewards. I think that's something that if we can all bring connection to, I think that's going to be huge. And then autonomy, the whole autonomy thing is that like you want to be able to you know, be control of your work and you know, not be micromanaged all the time. And the reason why I put this as a discussion question is because when I read that, when I've learned about that quote, that did change the way I thought about work and wanted to kind of optimize that as much as possible. So I wanted to share that with all of you too. So hopefully that kind of inspires you to like seek out that knowledge.
Yeah.
It's fascinating what you say about like you know, about the conversions and the satisfaction we get from it. And it's interesting because like sometimes in our world, there's not a correlation between how much you put into a campaign and the outcome, right? Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you do something that no one else in the marketplace is doing. And, you know, like they used to refer to it as growth hacking, right? But obviously the word hack has like a negative connotation, but that's really what we're doing. We're doing performance marketing and growth hacking, right? And it feels so good when you like, I know, Fernando, you've had some of these recently with self-cut systems, right? When you like think of like just this right angle or this perfect audience that no one else thought of, and you do that and it like takes off, like that to me feels very satisfying because you're like, you've like created your own like outlier experience, you know?
When I experience one of those, like if I test an audience and like it hits, it's like the sun's like beaming on me and I'm just like, I did it. Like,
it feels good, right?
I figured it out. I finally stacked my lookalike audiences nicely.
There you go. Yeah. But I think it's fair to say that you put in the work, right? Like it's not an accident.
No.
You know, you spent 10,000 hours on that kind of topic and you've learned it. And you know, if somebody else who was inexperienced would put in your shoes, I don't think they'd be able to reach that level. So I think that's
actually, that was one of the things that we talked about, which is like in our breakout, which is the 10,000 hours that prepares you to handle any situation, right? And I think that's the important thing of like knowing how to respond in a situation, right? Like, so when we were talking about it, my 10,000 hours was sales, right? I've heard any customer objection or complaint or angle or position or like talk track, there's always some kind of talk track that we have to respond or know how to handle that situation. So like with Fernando, we were talking about, and Vas, we were talking about like performance marketing, and Fernando was kind of downplaying it, being like, no, I don't know if that's really like a 10,000 hour thing. And I'm like, yeah, because if you looked at a campaign, you would know how to figure out what's wrong with it right before anyone else would, right? So it's almost like less about knowing what to do. It's more about like knowing what not to do in a lot of ways, right? Because I mean, Roy, I can build a WordPress site, probably not as good as you or Allison, right? But it would take me a lot longer because I know what to do. I don't know what not to do. Whereas you know what to avoid, right?
Yeah. That's great. So yeah, I think we could probably wrap things up. Unless there's any other, any other talking points. But yeah, I want to thank everybody, and yeah, it was a great discussion. I hope you enjoyed the book, at least on like the storytelling level. And do we want to announce the next?
Yeah. So let's do that. So before we do, I don't know, Carl, Matthias, do you guys need like a screenshot or whatever, a thumbnail?
Yeah, let me just grab one here.
Take our usual pictures. I don't know if you guys, my book
Let's get some smiles going on here.
Get some smiles going.
So it'll look depressed in the thumbnail.
Right.
Okay, nice.
Roy looks
Nobody has the book.
Amazing. Okay, we're good.
Okay, so the next book was actually gifted to me by Ileana, and so this is Ileana's book. I mean, I think she chose another one, but we went with this one because she gifted it to me, and I'm like, I need to find some time to read it. So here you go. So the book is, many of you have heard of it. The management team had all heard of it. Atomic Habits. Called Atomic. I don't know, Ileana, do you want to maybe give us like,
That's a banger.
It's
Is it
such a
banger?
good book.
you want to just like give us like the highlight, like the high level without like kind of ruining the punchline?
Yeah, the high level is it basically gives you practical tools that you can use immediately, as well as tools that you can use in the future to better develop and maintain habits in the long term, and then how to create certain habits and how to basically create this whole routine around it. Like, for example, without spoiling it, one of them is if you want to convince yourself to go to the gym, put your gym clothes out the night before. That way you already have stuff ready for you and you're building that habit. You're not having to rummage through your bag in like the middle of the morning and it's like dark outside. So you have it right there. All you have to do is get dressed. Everything's ready for you. Off to the gym. You're basically alleviating your own personal pain points to allow yourself to have a routine. And there's stuff like that throughout the entire book. And it's such a good read. And Riaz has the Ileana copy with the highlights.
Yes,
It's highlighted.
So it's all highlighted. I'm sure there's all sorts of things in here. But so thank you, Ileana. I appreciate the gift there. But so Atomic Habits, it's by James Clear. And Ileana, and we will send out like the dates and stuff for the book report and the times, which would probably be in March, I imagine, at this point. But yeah, very, and also I think one thing also you said, Ileana, is that this kind of ties in with our 2023 priority, right?
Yes.
So it's all about how we can become more efficient in our own lives and professionally, personally. So I'm very excited to read it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Great.
Roy,
Guess we
close it up there.
Close it off. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I want to thank everybody for participating and having great thoughts and discussions. And I think, yeah, if we can use some of these principles in practice, I think that we'll all be like more efficient and happier and like more satisfied in our work.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.